Somewhere in Yellowstone right now, elk are doing something their ancestors never had to do for 70 straight years. They're avoiding rivers. And the reason why involves one of the most debated wildlife stories in modern science, one that 100 million people have watched online, and most of them got the ending wrong. Stick with me until the end, because the real story is even stranger than the viral version. You've probably seen the video. It's called How Wolves Change Rivers. It has been watched more than 40 million times. It tells you that wolves came back to Yellowstone, elk got scared, plants grew back, beavers returned, and somehow the actual physical rivers changed course because of it. It sounds almost too perfect, like nature solving its own problem in one clean chain reaction. And that's exactly the problem, because when scientists went back and studied this more carefully, over years of fieldwork, they found the real story is messier, weirder, and honestly more interesting than the neat version that went viral. Here's what actually happened, starting from the beginning. In the early 1900s, the US government ran deliberate predator control programs across Yellowstone. Wolves were hunted, trapped, and killed off entirely, treated as a threat to livestock and to game animals that people wanted for themselves. By the 1920s, there wasn't a single wolf left in the park. For nearly 70 years, Yellowstone operated with essentially zero apex predators capable of hunting elk in open terrain. And during those 7 decades, elk did exactly what you'd expect an unhunted herbivore to do. They spread out. They lingered wherever the food was best, especially along riverbanks and valley bottoms, where young trees and soft vegetation grow thickest and easiest to reach. They had no reason to move. Nothing was hunting them there, and that safety became the default for generation after generation of elk who never once had to think about a predator waiting near the water. Then, in 1995, something happened that hadn't occurred in Yellowstone in generations. 14 grey wolves were captured in Canada and released into the park. 17 more followed the next year. And what scientists observed afterward is genuinely one of the most closely studied wildlife experiments on the planet. Because for the first time in 70 years, elk in Yellowstone had to relearn what it meant to be prey, essentially from scratch, with no living generation left that remembered how to do it. Multiple field studies conducted in the early 2000s documented something very specific. Elk began shifting toward forest edges and away from the open riverbanks they used to dominate without hesitation. Researchers gave this effect a name, the ecology of fear. It wasn't just that wolves were killing elk directly and thinning the herd through predation. It was that the surviving elk started behaving fundamentally differently, becoming more cautious, spending far less time exposed near open water, moving in tighter defensive groups, and staying closer to tree cover where they could escape quickly the moment a wolf appeared nearby. That is a real, measurable, extensively documented behavioral shift, confirmed independently across multiple separate research teams working in different parts of the park. This part of the story checks out completely, and nobody seriously disputes it. Here's where it gets complicated, and where the popular viral version of this story actually oversells what really happened. The viral narrative claims that once elk avoided the rivers, willow and aspen trees exploded back to life, almost overnight. Beavers flooded back into the park in huge numbers, and the literal physical rivers narrowed and changed course as a direct, simple result of wolves alone. Some of that is genuinely true. A 2015 study found that young alder trees along several Yellowstone streams grew back almost entirely after wolves returned, and that growth was concentrated specifically in the exact areas where elk used to linger the longest before wolves arrived. That's a real, measurable signal that predation pressure changed, which specific spots elk were willing to graze in, and that plants responded where elk pulled back. But here's what the viral video leaves out completely, and this is the part almost nobody talks about. Wildlife researchers who study this today are still actively debating how much of the vegetation recovery is really about wolves at all, versus everything else happening in the park at exactly the same time. Human hunting outside park boundaries was independently reducing elk numbers year after year. Grizzly bear populations were recovering and increasingly preying on elk calves each spring. Mountain lion populations were also rebuilding on their own timeline, adding another predator entirely separate from wolves. Even a massive wildfire in 1988 reshaped huge sections of the landscape years before wolves ever returned, and a series of warmer, drier winters changed snowpack and vegetation independently of any predator at all. Untangling exactly how much credit belongs to wolves alone versus all of these other forces tangled together is still an open scientific argument today, published and debated in ecology journals, not a settled fact packaged neatly for a viral video. So here's the honest version of this story, the one that actually holds up under real research. Elk really did change their behavior in a way that hadn't happened in 70 years. Avoiding open riverbanks specifically because of a predator, their bodies still somehow remembered how to fear, even after multiple generations had passed without ever encountering one. That part is remarkable, well documented and completely real. But the clean, satisfying story where wolves single-handedly rerouted actual rivers and rebuilt an entire ecosystem on their own is a simplified version of something far messier, where multiple forces were tangled together at once, and scientists are still working out exactly how much of the outcome truly belongs to the wolves themselves versus everything else happening in parallel. And honestly, that's what makes this a better story than the viral one, not a worse one. Real ecosystems don't behave like tidy dominoes falling neatly in a row for a 2-minute video. They behave like this instead, dozens of overlapping forces pulling in different directions, predator and prey relationships shifting in real time, decades of patient fieldwork trying to isolate one clear signal buried inside genuine natural chaos. The fact that scientists are still actively debating the details more than 30 years after wolves returned tells you this ecosystem is far too complex for a short internet explanation to capture accurately, no matter how satisfying that explanation feels to watch. Here's something else almost nobody mentions when they tell this story, and it's genuinely one of the most fascinating parts. This entire relearning process happened inside a single generation of elk. Calves born right around 1995 grew up in a park where, for the first time since their grandparents' grandparents were alive, standing still near a river for too long could genuinely get them killed. Behavior that had been completely irrelevant for 70 straight years suddenly mattered again, and it mattered almost immediately, not over centuries, but within a handful of years. That kind of rapid behavioral relearning is genuinely rare to document happening in real time in a large wild mammal population inside a landscape scientists happened to already be watching closely enough to actually catch it unfolding. Today, more than 100 wolves live across multiple established packs throughout Yellowstone, and researchers are still tracking exactly how elk distribute themselves across the landscape year after year. Still comparing river corridor by river corridor. Still measuring young tree growth season after season to try to separate the wolf effect from everything else happening at the same time. This is one of the longest continuously studied predator reintroductions on the entire planet, and even after 3 full decades of dedicated research, it still isn't fully settled science, which is exactly why researchers keep coming back to it. So the next time somebody sends you that video about wolves single-handedly changing the rivers, you now know the real version underneath it. Yes, wolves came back after 70 years of complete absence. Yes, elk genuinely changed where they were willing to stand and graze. But the rivers, the trees, the beavers, all of that part of the story is tangled up with human hunting pressure, grizzly predation, mountain lion recovery, wildfire history, and shifting weather patterns, all happening at once, and scientists are still working to sort out exactly how much of it truly traces back to the wolves alone. If you want the real story hiding behind the viral videos everyone shares without ever checking the details, this is exactly the kind of thing this channel is built around. Because most places just repeat whatever version gets the most clicks and moves on, And I'd genuinely rather show you what actually held up under real field research, even if it's messier than the version that goes viral. Subscribe if that's the kind of content you actually want more of. And tell me in the comments, had you seen the Wolf River video before today? And did you already know the real story behind it was this complicated? I'll see you in the next one.